Hello and welcome to the garden. Well, the plan is to do a little bit of sowing. I want to start some broad beans, but before I do that, I want to clear this greenhouse out because this is where my sowing station normally lives, and it stays in here until round about May when I plant this greenhouse up with chilies and peppers. Then it has to move into our small greenhouse, and it's a little bit cramped in there, so I'm going to be very happy to get back my proper sowing place here. So these pepper plants are done with. They're looking rather sad. There are one or two fruits I can pick off and use. They haven't been watered for a while. I shut off the watering system here a few weeks ago and have just left them to go over. And all I'm going to do with these is cut off the top growth. That'll go in one heap, and I will tip out the pots, and that compost will be recycled after it's had a chance to rot down for the root system to decay there. Now, you can keep peppers and chilies going over the winter, and it depends how you want to do that. There are two main approaches. One is to prune them back quite hard and then just keep the frost off of them, and hopefully they will start growing again as we go into spring. The other way is to simply move them indoors into a bright enough place, and then you can keep them going year round. So I've got a chilli plant in our kitchen. It's quite big now. I have to prune it back every now and then, and we've had that one going for 5 or 6 years, and it crops through most of the year. Every now and then, and it's not a particular time of year, but from time to time it will start to look a little bit sad, and then I will cut it back hard and new growth will shoot away and the plant will have a new lease of life. And that's all I need to do to maintain that, and it fruits for, well, a large proportion of the year, and it can be fruiting through winter. Of course, the light level's not great in the winter, but indoors the temperature is perfectly okay, and where we've got it in front of a couple of big windows, it seems to get plenty of light, and it does like to crop there. So we've kept that one going for a long time now. If I take one of these, of course, if I was going to overwinter this, I would not have stopped the water supply. However, it does serve to show what I would be doing if I want to keep this one going. So there are a few fruits on here I could take, actually. I'll remove those now. Right, let's take a closer look. So here's my main trunk. That's what I want to keep. This little side branch here, there's no use to keep that. I would remove all of this junk from this main trunk and just keep that clear from now on. And then you're looking to prune these above a node. So I think possibly there. Let's take that out, and the same here. And I'm just taking these cuts above a node, get rid of all that top growth, I don't want it, and get rid of that. And that one is done. So every cut wants to be above a node. You don't want to cut in the middle here. That's just going to leave a long length of stem to dry back, and at these nodes new growth will appear. Now, had I left the watering on, these wouldn't look quite so sad, and yeah, I mean, this one would be ready to go. You could just keep it frost free then, and with a bit of luck this chilli plant would continue next spring. Alternatively, if whilst they're still in good condition, you move the plants indoors where the temperature is fairly reasonable year round, you can just keep them going indefinitely. They do want to be pruned back from time to time, otherwise they'll just get bigger and bigger and they will start to get a little bit tired looking. But you can prune these pretty hard, ready to overwinter them, and yeah, they'll do quite nicely. I don't tend to do that with the plants I put in the greenhouse here. I will usually sow fresh. So unfortunately this one is being decapitated at soil level. That growth is going in one place, and then I'm just going to tip out these pots and this soil can be recycled. I will get rid of this weed first though. This is a nasty one with a long taproot. I don't want that in there. Right, so I'm going to go through this whole greenhouse, give it a good clear out. Well, this place looks a complete mess now, and I'm always caught out by just how much work is involved in either setting this up in May or then taking it all down again in the autumn or the winter when the plants are finished. But the one good thing with this sort of setup is that during the growing season I have hardly anything to do here. I very rarely feed these plants. I give them a fairly rich potting mix, plenty of manure and other organic matter, and some fish blood and bone. They don't really need supplemental liquid feed. And then I've got the watering system here, which I set up to give just the right sort of amount of water, and I can just walk away and leave them to it. These peppers in here, the smaller fruited sorts, I very rarely prune them. I do more pruning on those that I set out in the other greenhouses or the polytunnel, but in here I've got very little to do. So it kind of looks after itself during the growing season. It's just getting all these potted up and set up in May is quite a job, and then clearing it all down and turning this disaster area into a nice neat potting station again. That's also quite a job, and I've run out of time for today, so I will be continuing with this tomorrow. Well, it took a while, but order has finally been restored, and at last there is one small patch of the garden which is ready for next season, and sowing will start in here probably in January with the onions, and February with the peppers and chilies, and so on. But there is one thing that I want to start today, and that's some overwintering broad beans. So I did have some out this year, and they took an absolute pounding, and at several points during the season I thought I'm going to have to lift these, get rid of them, because their stems were broken and they were just so ragged from the winter. I mean, they're hard as nails. The frost isn't the problem, but the high winds and the battering it got from the rain, they looked awful, the plants. But when it came to cropping time, they put on some new growth and they gave us a reasonable harvest. So I will be doing that once again. I usually do overwinter some broad beans, and of course I will stick to the classic Aguadulce. Now, as an aside, I did pronounce that undoubtedly in a mangled manner, but with a G, because originally this was a bean from Spain, going back to the mid 19th century, and of course it was a selection from a much older variety with a much longer history than this one, but this has been the classic bean for overwintering for, I don't know, 150 years, something like that, and it's always done pretty well for us. I think I may have started them too early last year, and I think when the winter winds were battering them, perhaps the plants were a little bit too big. But the weather has got really miserable lately. I don't think anything's growing at any pace now, so I think maybe I could kick these off now, and hopefully they won't get too big before growth slows for the winter. I don't know how many seeds I've got here, but I'm going to start these off in some deep trays. There we go. The old deep module trays. These are fantastic. They've got such a great depth, and these produce really superb root systems. I'll probably sow everything I've got here, and that's probably going to be 2 trays. Now the broad bean, if you're not familiar with these, they have a little scar on the bottom, and that's where the root and the shoot will appear. And it doesn't really matter that much how you sow these. They will orient themselves in the correct manner, but I like to sow them with that scar down. And sometimes when I'm sowing these, I will soak them for just a little while, 20 minutes, no more than an hour. But I think this compost that I'm going to use today, that holds so much moisture that I don't think there's any benefit really in soaking these this time. So let's get sowing. This stuff is a kind of a blend of odds and ends of compost that I've got left over from this season. And we'll have to get some more in for next year. So to start with, it's the usual business of just filling this fairly loosely. I'm not going to pack that down at this stage. This is a bit lumpy, it's a bit fluffy. And so I can now sort of firm that down a little bit, not too much. And then I can start planting these beans. So I'm going to plant with the scar down, and I'm just going to push them a little bit further into that soil. They'll be planted at a reasonable depth. And as I'm doing this, I'm checking the beans to make sure that they're okay. I think most of these are all right, but there are 1 or 2 I can see that are split, have some issues, so I won't be sowing those. Now, before I had these trays, I used to sow these in deep pots, and that works okay as well. But if you can give them a good depth of soil, that does make a difference with the broad beans, I think. Yeah, well, there's a dodgy one. Something's had a nibble at that. That's not worth sowing. So now I can just top this back up. I'll just firm that in just a little bit. I don't want to compact this too much, but this compost is quite fluffy. It's full of bits of wood and junk as usual, but the beans won't care too much about that. Right, all that needs now is a good soaking. So you really want to get those beans nicely hydrated. So I'll let that just soak in for a few minutes, and then I'll probably give it another drop of water. At this stage, it's fine to give that plenty of water, but from now on, I will be a little bit sparing with it, because the last thing I want is for these seeds to rot before they germinate, and that's one of the reasons why I'm not putting these directly outdoors. I mean, the air temperature is a bit miserable now at the moment, but the soil temperature would be fine. I could plant these outdoors directly. That wouldn't be a problem, but they really don't like to sit in soggy soil, and it has been really wet the last few days. And also the mice would probably get them. So broad beans and peas I always sow undercover, because I lose too many to mice if I start them direct. And even in here in the greenhouse, they will manage to get to them if I don't cover them up. So I will put these in a propagator. I'll put the lid on it, and that will keep them away. Anyway, on to the second one. Right, I've run out of nice looking beans, but I've still got a few cells there, so I'm going to plant these dodgy ones anyway. There's no harm in doing that. I wouldn't have done if I had enough, but these probably won't germinate. Oh, yeah, I remember that. That is a little bit unfortunate. These are just about 3 or 4 millimeters too wide to allow the lid to go down, but I think at some point I might trim these down. But for now, I'll just set up 2 propagators. I've got plenty of space right now, so it's not a problem. Right, that should keep the mice away, and I expect we'll see some life in these in the next week or two. And when they're a reasonable size, I will set them out in the garden. I'm not entirely sure which bed they're going in yet. The beds that are supposed to take the legumes in this next season, well, they are full of other crops. I've got beetroot, chard, all sorts of chicory and endive in there. So I don't think there'll be a space there, but I will find a space somewhere for these to sit over winter. Well, anyway, it's great to have my sewing station back and have a bit more room to work in. But that is all for this video. Thanks ever so much for watching, and bye for now.